दिलों में प्यार की खुशबू तो होठों पर दुआ रखना दिलों में प्यार की खुशबू तो होठों पर दुआ रखना ईमान में वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना ईमान में वक्त से एक रिश्ता
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and welcome back to another episode of Friday Sermon for Kids. Today I am once again joined by two incredible panelists. Hassan, Areeb, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Are you both ready for today's discussion?
Wa alaikum assalam, Farhan bhai. I am definitely ready for today's discussion.
Me too, and I'm looking forward to it.
That is very good to hear. Now, in this week's Friday sermon, Huzoor continued to talk about the Battle of Ahzab. And that is going to be the topic of our discussion today. But before we start that, I think it's a good idea to listen to a clip from this week's Friday sermon.
खंदक की खुदाई के दौरान मुनाफिकों और मोमिनों की हालत का बयान भी हुआ है। इसकी तफसीर इस तरह है, इब्न इसहाक़ ने लिखा है कि कई मुनाफिकीन ने रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम और मुसलमानों के काम में शिरकत से सुस्ती की और वो थोड़ा सा काम करते और रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम को बताए बग़ैर और इजाज़त लिए बग़ैर घर खिसक जाते और मुसलमानों में से किसी को जब कोई ज़रूरत पेश आती तो वो नबी करीम सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की खिदमत में अर्ज़ करते और जाने की इजाज़त तलब करते। ये मोमिनों की हालत थी। मुनाफिकीन बग़ैर और पूछे चले जाते थे, मोमिन पूछे जाते थे, तो रसूलुल्लाह सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम को इजाज़त देते थे मोमिन को, और वो जैसी ही हाजत पूरी कर लेते तो वापस आ जाते।
Now, as is customary, I want to know what both of you learned from this week's Friday sermon. Areeb, why don't you start us off?
For sure, something that I learned in this week's Friday sermon was that if you're an honest and righteous person, you get true love from Allah. And Allah can help you out in the most miraculous ways.
Excellently done. Hassan, what about you?
I learned that miracles happen when you have developed the true attributes of Allah. For example, when you have a piece of iron and you put it inside a fire, the iron develops the color of a fire.
Excellently done. Now I think is a very good time to start our discussion. So Huzoor started his Friday sermon by talking about a very interesting incident that occurred while the ditch was being dug. Now, would you both sort of give me an overview of exactly what that incident was?
Of course, Farhan bhai, I can start. So prior to the Battle of Ahzab, also known as the Battle of the Trench, the companions of the Holy Prophet ﷺ were busy digging the trench. The daughter of Hazrat Bashir bin Saad anhu was given some dates by her mother to give to her father and uncle. While she was looking for them, she passed by the Holy Prophet ﷺ, who asked her what she was carrying.
And once the Holy Prophet ﷺ, he got the dates and he put them in between two cloths. And then he told someone to announce that it's time to eat. Miraculously, even after everyone was done, the dates were still falling out of the cloth.
Excellently done to the both of you. Now, Huzoor also mentioned other incidents that were food related as well. One particular incident is about a companion who came to the Holy Prophet ﷺ and gave him a dish called has. Now, has is a combination of dates and paneer. Now, what Hazrat Muhammad ﷺ did was that he divided this food amongst the diggers of the trench at the time. Now, the Muslims who were digging the trench ate fully. And interestingly enough, after they were fully done eating, the dish seemed as though it was untouched.
Wow, mashallah, that is very inspiring.
Yes, I totally agree.
Yeah, and Huzoor mentioned that, this multiplication of food and the fact that when the Holy Prophet ﷺ would put his hand over an injury and that injury miraculously started healing, these were all just testaments of the sheer spiritual power of the Holy Prophet ﷺ. And the promised Messiah ﷺ also attests to this as well, that this spiritual power is seen through these various incidents. Now I think it's a pretty good time to, take a little break and head into our next segment, Word of the Sermon, where our good friend Ubaid Rahman will help us understand a word that Huzoor used in this week's Friday sermon. So for that, Ubaid Rahman, take it away, my friend.
Jazakallah, guys. So this week's word of the sermon is mu'ahada. This is an originally Arabic word, and it simply means an agreement, treaty, or a covenant. In the context of this week's Friday sermon, beloved Huzoor used the word mu'ahada to refer to the treaty between the Jewish tribe Banu Qurayza and the Muslims, which the Banu Qurayza ended up breaking and betraying the Muslims during the Battle of Ahzab. Hope that helps. Back over to you guys.
Very well done, Ubaid Rahman. It is always helpful to have you here. Now, let's get back into this discussion. So, Huzoor talked about the numbers of Muslims that were present during the Battle of Ahzab. Huzoor also stated that there are many different narrations that state different numbers. For example, some narrations state that there were 700 Muslims. Other narrations state that there were 2,000. Some narrations state that there were 3,000. Huzoor stated that Hazrat Mirza Bashiruddin Mahmud Ahmad anhu very wisely tackled this sort of confusion by not considering these narrations to be false, rather considering them to be a part of a whole. Can you both sort of explain to me exactly how these narrations divided these numbers?
Of course. Huzoor mentioned that during the Battle of Uhud, there were 700 people when they turned back and attacked the second time. The Battle of Ahzab was 2 years after the Battle of Uhud, so it wouldn't make any sense for the Muslims to still have 700 people fighting for them, considering the success that Islam had within this period. But it also wouldn't make sense for the number to go all the way to 3,000 either, considering that no big tribes had joined the Muslim army at this time. So Hazrat Muslim Maud anhu states that 1,200 Muslims is a much more accurate representation.
Huzoor mentioned the large difference between 700 and 3,000 people was because the war was divided into 3 parts. The first was when the ditch was being dug up. Everybody was helping, including the women and children. So it makes sense for the number to be around 3,000 here.
That is exactly right. And Huzoor then instructed all of the women and the children to head back. And those that were above the age of 15 and were capable of fighting, they were instructed to stay. So at this point, it would make sense for the number to be around 1,200. Now, in regards to the number 700 that is mentioned in some narrations, Huzoor states that the Holy Prophet ﷺ divided the 1,200 main force of Muslims into different parts. And this is so that all of the Muslims could sort of cover the areas where the ditch was too shallow or where the ditch didn't cover it, to ensure that the Quraysh army didn't get through or infiltrate the secure area at the time. Now, Huzoor also stated that the Holy Prophet ﷺ stationed 200 Muslims at one point and stationed 300 Muslims at another point. So with a 500 reduction from the main army, the overall number then sits at around 700. So with that, Huzoor covers the different numbers that all of these narrations present, and it makes a lot more sense now. I think it would be a good idea to take a little break and head into our next segment right now, and that is the question of the sermon. So I hope you boys are ready. Now I will give you your question and then your options, and then you'll have 10 seconds to think of your answer. Okay? Alright, so here is your question. How many days before the arrival of Abu Sufyan did the Muslims complete the trench? Option A, 3 days. Option B, 5 days. Option C, 7 days. Or option D, 9 days. Your 10 seconds start now. Okay, time is up. Arif, why don't you start us off? What is your answer?
I'm going to go with C, 7 days.
Me too. I'm also going to go with 7 days.
Okay, so the correct answer is actually option A, 3 days. But that's okay. Inshallah, you both will get it next time. Now, I think it is a good idea to head back into this discussion. So, Huzoor states that when the Holy Prophet ﷺ divided the Muslims into these different sort of groups to protect the areas of the trench that were weaker or areas that the trench didn't cover, the Holy Prophet ﷺ really emphasized to the Muslims that their guard should not waver or weaken in any way, be it day or night. Because Abu Sufyan's army could infiltrate in any way. They could find those weak spots and they could use those to get in. Now, because the Muslims were instructed like this, Abu Sufyan's army could not get through. So, Huzoor states that Abu Sufyan actually used a different tactic, and that was to utilize Huy bin Akhtar, a Jewish tribe leader that was from Mecca. Now, how Abu Sufyan used him is he instructed him to secretly get into Medina and head towards the Banu Qurayza, which was a Jewish tribe at the time, and talk them into breaking their treaty with the Muslims.
Farhan Bhai, I have a question. How exactly was Huy able to convince the leader of Banu Qurayza to break the treaty with the Muslims?
That is an excellent question, Hassan. And Huzoor answered this by stating that Huy painted an incredible picture for Ka'b, the leader of the Banu Qurayza, and this picture convinced Ka'b to break this treaty with the Muslims. Now, when the Holy Prophet ﷺ heard of this, he sent Hazrat Sa'd bin Muaz anhu and Hazrat Sa'd bin Ubadah anhu along with some other influential Muslims to confirm this news. Now, the Holy Prophet ﷺ also instructed them that if this news were true, that the Jews truly did break this treaty with the Muslims, they should secretly indicate that to the Holy Prophet ﷺ. But if the treaty was not broken, then these individuals or the Muslims that the Holy Prophet ﷺ sent should openly announce that to everyone. Now, when this delegation of Muslims sort of reached Ka'b, Ka'b arrogantly told them, leave. I don't have a treaty with the Muslims. This news was then secretly presented to the Holy Prophet ﷺ. The Holy Prophet ﷺ calmly responded to this news by stating that there will be a time when he would be circling the Kaaba with its keys in his hand, and Caesar and the crossroads would be destroyed. And with that, we come to the end of today's discussion. Let's give our audience a little recap of what we discussed today.
This week, Huzoor, may Allah be his helper, continued to talk about the Battle of Ahzab and mentioned some miraculous incidents happened with food being blessed for a large number of people.
Huzoor also mentioned the completion of the ditch and exactly how many Muslims participated in the battle. Huzoor also mentioned how the tribe of Banu Qurayza broke the treaty with the Muslims.
Excellent job to the both of you. Near the end of the Friday sermon, Huzoor mentioned that it was the start of the Khuddam al-Ahmadiyya Ijtima UK and gave some guidance to the Khuddam. Huzoor also announced the funeral prayer for 4 deceased members of the Jamaat. And with that, we come to the end of this week's episode.
And make sure to watch the full Friday sermon on your own time.
Until next time,
Khuda
Khuda Hafiz.
मगर है शर्त तुमसे मुसलसल राबता रखना मगर है शर्त तुम उससे मुसलसल राबता रखना इमाम वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना दिलों में प्यार की खुशबू तो होठों पर दुआ रखना इमाम वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना इमाम वक्त से एक रिश्ता इश्क वफा रखना